thank you so much. I'm very happy and very proud to welcome you all today for this webinar dedicated to publication that we worked on for the last few months, an important publication that we'll have the pleasure to introduce to you. So I'm after Campredon. I am the Director of Field Measurement at CDC Biodiversité. I'm in charge of the team that developed the GBS and is now in charge of also spreading it all around the world. So we want to also start to wait the others, just to take this opportunity in the meantime to give a special thanks to all the team that worked a lot on this publication. They really gave a special effort in making very complex topics understandable, and then in the end give concrete and ambitious solutions to address the biodiversity crisis for all financial institutions. So in alphabetical order, let me thank Julie Bonnet, Emma Godefroy, Vincent Guénon, and Violette Pradère, who gave a very intense work on this publication. And thank you also to all the people that participated to the publication. It gathered a lot of people, so thank you so much for this. It's very key that you all participate to this publication. And also let me thank Joshua Berger for his precious advice and in-depth proofreading. You will be able, of course, to download the full publication in the end of the webinar. So that will be a possibility for you to enjoy the 60 pages of intense work on linking financial institution work and finance with biodiversity. And now starting to go a bit more into the agenda today. So as you can see, we will have the pleasure to have some words from Julen González Redín from Finance for Biodiversity Foundation. It's very key that he can develop and give a few words because he accepted kindly to give a forward into the publication, and he is now joining us to develop this. So thank you so much, Julen. And Finance for Biodiversity Foundation is very key in the ecosystem, as it's mobilizing the whole financial ecosystem to address biodiversity crisis. They do a lot of great works. They compare tools and methodology to give precious advice to all financial institutions so they can a bit more navigate into this very complex topic. As you can see, then Violette will present some key elements of the publication, and especially a very important scheme that is presenting how to address the main links between business and biodiversity with different metrics, different approaches. So it's going to be very interesting. And then let me thank also Alexis from Amundi that will introduce a case study along with Julie, showing how BIA-GBS can be used to disclose information in line with the TNFD, so the framework developed in September 2023. And finally, Violette will close the event with some words on how you, of course, can be part of the solution. So stay with us during this full hour. Then on the next slide, just to give you a bit of an introduction and some context on what we are doing here at the Biodiversity, what is the goal of the team, what we are doing, and where do we start and where do we end. So basically, you're all aware of this, but the starting point of our activity is the fact that we are experiencing a biodiversity crisis is now well documented. It's a scientific research that has done a lot over the recent years to prove that exactly we are doing and we are living now in a very much crisis. So we have to deal with that. Now, another fact that is very key is that this crisis is basically the results of human activity. That is something that is very key because above all, it affects our community through what we call like feedback loops. Basically, we impact biodiversity and then biodiversity impacts us. So the scientific community has rapidly identified that our societies are dependent on ecosystem services provided by nature, which are actually being degraded by the current crisis. So this is the key elements that we are talking about it today. This is the relationship between the economic world and nature. And this actually raises a number of questions. What are the risks for companies, for financial institutions? How much, for example, will it cost if you or anyone don't find an alternative to disappearing ecosystem services? So we go now into like what we call, in the same for climate, two types of risk, physical and transition risk. And very much with this like double materiality approach, we can have and slowly understand how the economy is actually linked to biodiversity. And now, in the end, after that we have seen for example, a big agreement at the COP15, that we have now frameworks to give you, well, some guidelines on how to deal with that. What are the tools and solutions that we can implement to go into that direction, respect the COP15 agreement, and in the end, restore biodiversity? And then it comes to our solution. What did we develop? The GBS, all the solutions for financial institutions, and et cetera, that we will present to you today. So this is basically the whole context of what we do here and what you're gonna hear during this full hour. Then on the next slide, basically this publication, so you can appreciate the nice picture that we chose. It is to tell you that it is part of work that is called Mission Économie de la Biodiversité. It's basically something that is financed by the Caisse de dépôt and the Banque des Territoires, that is basically dedicated to understanding how economy and biodiversity are interlinked, and it covers a full range of different topics. And this publication is actually dedicated to finance, but you can also find other publication with the link on the presentation. The last one was the full publication on the GBS, so accounting for positive and negative impact throughout the value chain. And it gives you some more details on how the GBS in itself work, how do we account for negative and positive impact, for instance, but also for static and dynamic, etc. So all the key concepts. And then on the next slide, and after I will give the floor to the people that knows, what we're gonna go through today is basically the full content of the publication. So the publication is built around different big parts. So first, as I said, a foreword from Julen, so thank you again. Then an overview of what we developed, so the GBS link solutions for the financial sector. What are the solutions for you? What differentiates this from what we develop for businesses, extra. Then a part on assessing impact and dependencies on listed equities and bonds. So it's basically BIA-GBS and all the related work that we develop around this topic. Then a focus on non-listed assets, because it's also very key in order to understand what will be your impact throughout your whole portfolio. So we develop also some specific and very interesting measurement on, for example, private equity sector, etc., with guidance on how to deal with that. And then a more related, risk-related topic and how to understand what's the role between GBS, risk assessment, and measurement landscape. It also includes 3 case studies. So an analysis of the impact of the Stocks Europe 600 portfolio. It's basically an exercise to analyze the impact on biodiversity of a full portfolio that replicates the Stocks Europe 60 index. How BIA-GBS can be used to discuss that with the TNAD framework. So thank you, Alexis, that you're here. We can talk about it. And then the last one, assessing the biodiversity-related financial risk of the French financial institutions with BIA-GBS. So thank you so much for spending some time with us today, and I will give the floor to Julen now, so we can also introduce what it is doing at the Finance for Biodiversity Foundation. And thank you again for accepting to be here today and to give the forward into the publication.
Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for inviting me here for this presentation. And before starting, I would like to congratulate you and your team, CDC Biodiversité, not only for this fantastic publication, but also for the outstanding work you've been developing over the past years in the footprinting field. I think it's much needed that tools and companies like yours continue to improve the measurement of impacts and dependencies of both companies and financial institutions. So congratulations again on your fantastic career. Of course, some words as well for Carbon for Finance through your collaboration. And again, I'm glad to be here. And yeah, thank you so much in that sense. If you can go to the next slide, please. Yes, thank you. So next one again. So for those of you that don't know or are not familiar with the foundation, I will briefly provide a few words on the foundation and the projects that we carry out. And then I wanted to very quickly just comment on a couple of key projects that we are currently carrying out. A guide on biodiversity measurement approaches that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. And then also the so-called multi-tool project, in which we are, of course, collaborating with CDC Biodiversité, Carbon for Finance, and other footprinting developers on measuring the impacts and dependencies of the MSCI ACWI universe. Next slide, please. So again, in case you are not familiar with the foundation, just a quick high-level description. So we are a non-profit international organization. Our main flag or guide is the pledge that we published, that we released back in 2020. The pledge is basically a statement of 5 commitments on nature and biodiversity that you can find, you can see at the bottom of the slide. And through this pledge, we try to guide, or we act as a driver of the finance sector on everything related to nature and biodiversity. So we help financial institutions in collaborating with companies, assessing their impacts, setting their targets on nature, reporting publicly, and so on and so forth. So far, we have more than 160 signatories, and we expect to have this number increased over the next months as well. And next slide, please. The way we work, just to give you an idea, is through working groups. So we have one working group per pledge commitment. As you can see, we have one for impact assessment, for example, which I'm coordinating. And within each working group, we have different, let's say, subgroups responsible or addressing different topics. And that's basically the way we work. We try to guide financial institutions, our signatories, through working groups on different topics. We are, of course, not a reporting framework. We are not mandatory. We just guide and try to drive change in the market. Next slide, please. So here in the screen, you can see one of the main, let's say, projects in terms of measurement. So this is the guide on biodiversity measurement approaches that we released a few weeks ago. This is the 3rd edition in collaboration with the EU Business and Biodiversity platform. And basically, this guide is out there to help and to guide financial institutions in selecting or choosing the right measurement approach to measure impacts, dependencies, risks, and opportunities. We are not only focused on biodiversity footprinting tools. I would say 80–90% of the tools are, but we also include, and we will continue to include, other measurement approaches that are beyond or that are focused on other areas besides footprinting. And next, 4th edition will come after summer. This one will include not only new tools, but also positive impact approaches. So we are already working on this one. And of course, just the last word here, of course, besides or in addition to driving change in the market, we also try to collaborate as much as we can with key organizations. That's why, for instance, we are collaborating closely with the EU Business and Biodiversity platform, including, as you can see on the bottom right corner, the assessment of biodiversity measurement approaches report, which is led by Business and Biodiversity platform and Arcadis. So again, their team and our team are collaborating closely in this guide and their guide. So just so that you are all aware of that. Next slide, please. Then another key project, and happy to answer questions if there are any, is the so-called multi-tool project. So basically, back in January, we kicked off a project with in collaboration with CDC Biodiversité, Carbon for Finance, and other footprinting tool providers. And the goal of this project is to calculate and analyze and to help the market understanding the impacts and dependencies of around 3,000 companies, the 3,000 companies of the MSCI ACWI universe, including those companies from the Nature Action 100 initiative. So as I said before, we are basically collaborating with 4 different footprinting tools. And the aim, again, is to not only contribute to the growing footprinting field, but also, or mainly, to allow informed engagement actions between financial institutions and companies. As we know, financial institutions, the way they can drive change is mainly through their portfolios. Therefore, engagement with companies from their portfolios is key. And we try to basically provide with the needed information to make those engagement actions as efficient as possible. Next slide, please. Well, just very quickly, this is basically the map of the project. The project is coordinated by us, Finance for Biodiversity, in collaboration with Global Balance and Wildcap technical assistance. And you also have there the different tools, the different tool developers. And of course, we have ensured that we include key project reviewers to ensure that the quality, not only the quantity, but the quality of the outcome is the best as possible. Next slide, please. So in terms of the outcomes, we expect to release a publication by May or June, the latest. We will try to be in May. And this publication, or 2 publications, I will say, one is going to be a high-level methodology, and the other one will be a results report, only showing aggregated, normalized results. Of course, we are not going to show results in MSA or PDF or any other footprinting measurement unit. So this is expected by May, June. So you will be able to access the publication in a few weeks or a few months. Next and last slide, I think. And that's all. Well, thank you very much again. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them through the chat, or you can email me if you want more information, or if you have questions about any topic. So thank you very much again.
Thank you, Julen, for your intervention and for all your work at the Finance for Biodiversity Foundation. So maybe I can go to the next part, which is the publication content. So I would like to take the 20 next minutes to talk a bit about 2 main figures that are presented in the publication. But before to go into the content, maybe I can give a few words of introduction about the finance team at CDC Biodiversité. So my name is Julen Pradère. I'm working at CDC Biodiversité since 2021 and leading all the work related to all the application of the Global Biodiversity Score for financial institutions. So we are a team of about 5 people dedicated to 2 main applications of biodiversity footprinting with the GBS for financial institutions. First, a database that was created with Carbon for Finance and that Julen mentioned, BIA-GBS. And second, all the other applications of biodiversity footprinting to measure impacts and dependencies of portfolios on biodiversity, which can be regrouped under the umbrella term GBSFI. So the first graph I wanted to present during this webinar was a graph that is dedicated to presenting all the options that can be explored to use the GBS for financial institutions. As I just said, we have 2 main applications that are presented in the publication. First, there is BIA-GBS that is dedicated to listed assets, and that was built in partnership with Carbon for Finance. So this database exists since 2021. And then there is GBSFI. The main principle of GBSFI is to directly assess impacts and dependencies of a listed or non-listed portfolio, but not with public data. So it can be either data collected by the financial institution or we can also work directly with the investors. So in this publication, we wanted to focus on the different use cases of the GBS, specifically on GBSFI, to explain the different use case we can have depending on the type of input data we have. So first, there is the least precise assessment that we call a screening. The main principle of a screening is to use very few input data. So it will be, for instance, financial input data, such as turnover, outstanding amounts, etc., and to assess the impact and dependency using only this kind of data. So we put BIA-GBS in this category because in the initial version of the database, it was mainly with financial data and also with very precise data regarding the climate change pressure that were used in the database. But of course, the aim of the database is to progressively add more precise data so that it can allow the financial institutions to have a more precise view of the impacts and dependencies of their portfolio. The screening can also be done for all types of portfolio, and it can be very useful, for instance, for banking portfolio, for instance, for mortgages, assets, etc. Because usually when financial institutions begin to take interest in biodiversity, there are very few data that is available at the portfolio level. So only with sector and country of the financing, outstanding or investment amounts, we are able to have a first screening of the impacts and dependencies with sectoral impact factors. So that's really a use case that is very useful to have a first overview of the biodiversity-related risk. Then, if we want to have a more precise overview of the biodiversity impacts and dependency, we can go on the right hand of the graph and, for instance, conduct an advanced screening. The advanced screening can also be conducted on most types of portfolios. But here the principle will be to use more precise data and also physical data. So for instance, it will be around 20 types of physical indicators. And if I give an example, if we look at real estate portfolio, we will look at the CO2 emission. We will look at the surface that are used to build the buildings. We can be able to look at the raw materials that are used to construct the buildings. And finally, if we want really to start to build, for instance, action plans at the investee level, we can conduct a simplified biodiversity footprint assessment. Here we really collect around 100 physical indicators, so much more precise indicators. If I take the same example of the real estate portfolio, I will look at one project and, for instance, list all the tonnages of raw materials that were used to construct this building and the water consumed, etc. This last use case is not meant to be conducted at the portfolio level. The idea is to make a focus on a few financing to go deeper into the understanding of biodiversity-related risks for this asset and to be able to build action plans, etc. There is actually 4 use cases that could be added to this graph. That is the comprehensive biodiversity footprint assessment. So here it's the biodiversity footprint assessment that is conducted directly with the corporate and that takes much more time and much more data. And it's only with a comprehensive biodiversity footprint assessment that a company will be, for instance, able to build quantified trajectories regarding biodiversity. So, of course, these different assessments will have different ranges of cost and of time needed to obtain impact and dependencies. So I will let you look at the publication for further detail. The case of BIA-GBS is slightly different as it is a database that is constructed with public data, so it will be a subscription with annual fee, whereas in GBSFI, we are able to work directly with financial institutions and sometimes either with the investors And so the cost will really depend on the level of ambition of the final user. So about this, this graph, we connected these different use cases with the needs that are addressed and the business applications that are connected. So of course, when you conduct a screening, at the end of the evaluation, you will not be able to have the same level of precision than when you conduct a simplified biodiversity footprint assessment. So each use case will have different needs that are addressed and business applications that can be done. I will also let you look at the detail in the publication, but you can see that, of course, if you want to properly compare issuer one with another, and if you want to track progress, etc., you will have to go as much as possible on the right hand of the graph at the advanced screening, and if possible at the simplified biodiversity footprint assessment level. So that was the first graph we wanted to show, because it is a good summary of all the applications that can be done with a biodiversity footprinting tool as the Global Biodiversity Score for financial institutions. There is really a wide range of options, and the idea is that all financial institutions can take a step and make a first assessment with very few data, and so not a very good precision at the end, but a very good overview of the biodiversity-related risks. And then, when it is possible, it is really feasible with the Global Biodiversity Score to go deeper into the comprehension of the biodiversity-related risks using the GBS. So the second graph I wanted to show was about the role of the Global Biodiversity Score in the biodiversity risk measurement, because as you may know, biodiversity cannot be summed up into one single metric. There is multiple facets of biodiversity that should be measured in order to have a proper comprehension of biodiversity-related risks. So we tried to build a graph that would describe all the facets of biodiversity that should be measured, some example of metrics associated, and finally to connect that with the data that could be used to assess these different facets of biodiversity. So first, about what should be measured. So the things that should be measured can be differentiated between biodiversity state and biodiversity significance. The biodiversity state is the state of biodiversity, and biodiversity can be defined at 3 different levels: at the ecosystem level, at the species level, and at the genetic level. To date, there is metrics that exist for the ecosystem level and for the species level, but there is not really a metric that exists for the genetic level. At the ecosystem level, we measure the health of an ecosystem, and we have to make the difference between the condition of an ecosystem, which is the state of the ecosystem, and the extent of the ecosystem. For instance, at the metric level, in the GBS, we use the MSA square kilometers. So MSA stands for mean species abundance. At 100%, you have a totally undisturbed ecosystem, and at 0%, you have, for instance, a parking lot with no life on it. So that's an example of how to measure the condition of an ecosystem, but then there is the extent, so the size of the ecosystem, which can be measured in square kilometers. So that's for the biodiversity state at the ecosystem level. At the species level, we can, for instance, use the star unit that is provided by the IUCN, which will provide information about the species that are present, and in particular the endangered species that are present in an ecosystem. Then we also have to measure biodiversity significance. So biodiversity significance is the importance of different ecosystems. We chose to put 4 main facets of biodiversity significance that should be measured. First, there is a species that, as you can see, is between biodiversity state and biodiversity significance. because of course, if you have a lot of endangered species in an ecosystem, then this ecosystem will have a high biodiversity significance. But there is other facets in biodiversity significance, such as protected areas, key biodiversity areas, and also ecosystem services. So an ecosystem that is protected or that is listed as a key biodiversity areas or that provides a lot of ecosystem services will have a very high biodiversity significance. For these different facets of biodiversity significance, there is dedicated metrics. So for protected areas and key biodiversity areas, it will be the surface and the number of protected areas and key biodiversity areas. And for ecosystem services, it's much more complicated because each ecosystem service will have its own metric. Then maybe very briefly about the data that can be used for the assessment of such biodiversity facets. First, we can use input data at the macro level. So for instance, if we assess a company, the data will be high level company data, such as country of operation and economic data, such as turnover, etc. in a sector and a country. So we are able actually to assess both biodiversity state and biodiversity significance using only this kind of data. And then we have to combine it with external models. So we focused in the graph on González and Global because it's the models we use in the GBS, but you can use a wide range of models to be able to connect this macro level data with the assessment of biodiversity state and significance. But then you can also assess biodiversity related risks, so biodiversity state and biodiversity significance, using more precise data. So data at the site level, for instance, and there is a very wide range of data that can be used. Maybe I will start by the biodiversity significance. For the biodiversity significance, if you have very precise information about site locations, that can be used as an input data that will be very precise. And for the biodiversity state, and especially for the ecosystem level, you can use a very wide range of data. So first you can use, for instance, emission and pressure data. So that's actually the most common use case in tools such as the GBS. So you will have a wide range of physical indicators such as emission of pollutants, land use, water consumption, etc. And you will connect these physical indicators with external models such as Global Biodiversity to compute the impact on biodiversity. But you can also have even more precise data. For instance, you can do habitat mapping and rating to be able to compute directly the condition and extent of the ecosystem. Also, there is a strong link between the species level and the ecosystem level. So you can compute the biodiversity state at the species level, at the site level, if you make assessment on the presence of some species on site. And then if you conduct full ecological surveys, so you really assess all the species that are present in a site with a comparison to reference state, you are able to compute the condition and extent of the ecosystem, because the main principle of the condition of an ecosystem is to compute all the species that are present in comparison to a reference state. So that's it for the main presentation of this graph. So I will let you go into the detail in the publication, as we wrote a lot of supplementary information in the text. And also, so that was two main examples, but there is a lot of other focuses in the presentation, in the publication. So I will now let Julie, Bonnet, and Alexis Sciau from Amundi, whom I thank you a lot, present the one case study that was in the publication that was conducted last year, and that was dedicated to the test of the TNFD beta framework focused on the neighborhood portfolio.
Thank you very much, Violette. So my name is Julen Bonnet. I'm a research officer at CDC Biodiversité. And so today with Alexis, we will present to you this case study, which is available in the publication. So Alexis, I think you can take the floor and start with a little introduction.
Thank you very much, and hello everyone. I'm very pleased to be here today, so thank you very much for inviting us to this webinar. Before we start, I wanted to congratulate the CDC Biodiversity team on all the work done, which enable investors such as ourselves to better understand biodiversity. And before we dive in the results with Julie, I wanted to give you a bit of context on why we decided to work on this TNFD pilot. So we can say that biodiversity is quite a recent topic when we speak about responsible investment. It is, for instance, more recent than climate. The TNFD was launched in June 2021, 5 years after the TCFD. Same for the SBTN framework that is still not available, whereas we have many companies with approved SBT targets. However, as biodiversity in its wide definition is very similar to nature or to environment, it has been integrated in Amundi ESG internal scoring since 2011. So we have some specific criteria that are related to biodiversity. One is biodiversity and pollution, and other are related to the key factor of biodiversity loss that are identified by IBES, such as water management, sustainable forest management, or sustainable buildings. So this was in 2011, but since then we focus more on this topic of biodiversity. And for instance, in 2021, we became signatory of the Finance for Biodiversity Pledge. So I won't describe what it is because I think Julen did it a lot better than I could earlier in this presentation. And in 2022, we first published our biodiversity footprint at Amundi level. So it was based on BIA-GBS, and it's also around that time that we decided to adhere to the B4B Plus Club and to start the work on this TNFD pilot. So doing so, our objective was twofold. First, it was to play our role as a market participant to collaborate on the topic and to help improve the global knowledge on biodiversity. And second, it was also to gain expertise on the biodiversity metric and to understand better what it can do and what are its limits.
Thank you, Alexis. So then I will now present just a little bit about this TNFD pilot. And so I will present to you a few results, main results, main methodology, etc. So you can see here that the case study in the publication is a 4-page document. And in this document, you will have a little bit of context, the methodology, the results, but also a few lessons learned and limits of this work. And so if you want to know more about what we did during this pilot, I would strongly encourage you to go read these 4 pages in the publication. But for now, I will just present to you the overall methodology and then a few key results of these pilots. So first on the methodology, so Violette said it earlier at the beginning, but the idea of this TNFD pilot was to test the LEAP approach of the TNFD, so locate, evaluate, assess, and prepare, for 10 companies of the agriculture and fisheries sector. And so we conducted each of these phases at two different levels, depending on the feasibility. So we conducted this phase at a portfolio level when it was possible. And if not, we conducted it for one focus company in the portfolio. So here you have the overall methodology used for each phase. And today I'm going to talk a little bit more about the evaluate phase and some key results, but you can still here see what we did for all the phases. So for the idea of the locate phase is to locate the interface with nature. And so we were able to find some GPS location of production sites or of the upstream value chain, and then combine it with data from IBET to study the biodiversity significance that Violette presented, so on the right end of her graph. So protected areas, threatened species, and key biodiversity areas. Then for the evaluate phase, we were able to conduct this phase both at portfolio and company level, and we used the database BIA-GBS to evaluate impacts and dependencies of these 10 companies. We then conducted the assess phase, which goal is to assess the risk and opportunities. And so we conducted it at company level, and we were able to do 2 different methodologies. So first, a qualitative assessment risk by risk, but also a quantitative assessment at portfolio level. And finally, we conducted the prepare phase, so which idea is to prepare, to respond and report. So really thinking about targets, etc. So here on the publication, you will have a little bit more detail on each of these phases, but for now, I'm going to focus on the evaluate phase. So on the next slide, you can see a little bit more about the methodology. So for the evaluate phase, we used the database BIA-GBS that we presented a little bit earlier. And as you can see on this graph, there are 2 approaches possible in this database. The first approach, with the number 1 on the graph, is the statistical approach, which is an approach currently available on the database online. And the second approach is what we call a bottom-up approach, and it's an approach on which we are currently working on. And so the difference between these 2 approaches is the input data that is used in the GBS in order to obtain the impacts and dependencies. And so you can see here that on the first approach, we use financial data and GHG emissions data, meaning that in what Violette presented to you earlier, we are more on the screening side. So we are able to compare between sectors and different countries, etc. And in the bottom-up approach, we use product quantities, so physical data instead of financial data, meaning that we are more on the advanced screening methodology or simplified BFA. And so this allows us to compare 2 companies within the same sector. And so for this pilot, the bottom-up approach was used, which was really interesting to see the different results we were able to obtain by using this bottom-up approach. And so, for example, you can see on this next graph, one result we were able to obtain. So here on this graph, you see 5 different companies within the same sector. So the manufacturer of beverages sector. These 5 companies would not be able to be differentiated using a statistical approach because they are all in the same sector. But here we see that we are able to differentiate them. So there are 2 main informations on this graph that you need to understand. First is the size of the bubble. So the size of the bubble represents the overall impact of the company. So a bigger bubble means a bigger impact attributed to the portfolio. And then the second axis is the vertical axis on the left. So you can see here, it's the impact intensity per ton of product of the company. So a company higher on this axis has a higher impact intensity per ton of product. And here you can see that even if these 5 companies are all in the same sectors, we were able to differentiate their impact per ton of product because we were able to collect the different types of product that they produce. So you can see here, for example, at the top, we have companies that produce a distilled alcohol. Then on the middle, you have the beer companies. And then with the least intensive impact, you have the soft drink companies such as Coca-Cola. So that was one of the things that we were able to do by using physical data instead of financial data in this pilot. And then on the next slide, you will see another type of results we were able to obtain. So here is a graph which focuses on the products which were present in the different portfolios. So you have 2 main informations on this graph. First, you have the size of the bubble, which represents the impact intensity per ton of product, meaning a bigger bubble means a bigger impact intensity. So you can see here, for example, you have the green bubble at the middle, which is coffee, or on the top left, you have algae, etc. So these big bubbles mean a big impact intensity per ton of product. And so that was one thing we were able to deduce from this pilot, which products were intensive in terms of impact on biodiversity. And then the second interesting aspect of this graph is the vision by pressure. So here you can see that you have different colors of bubbles, and they are placed a lot of different ways on the graph. So on the bottom right, you have green bubbles, and these green bubbles mean that these products have a high land use pressure in the overall score. And so, which is interesting to see is that these correspond with products which have a high deforestation risk. So you can see here, I talked about coffee, but you also have nuts, vegetable oil, etc. So these products associated with a high deforestation risk have a high land use impact on biodiversity. And then on the other side of the graph, you have the blue bubbles on the top left. And these bubbles mean that the main pressure of these products is hydrological disturbance due to direct water use, meaning that their impact is due to water consumption and water withdrawal. And so these products are, for example, here you can see algae, bottled water. And so that's another type of products that were available in this portfolio. You had both sides. And finally, you have a little bit at the bottom left corner, you had two products which were fish products, where the main pressure was freshwater eutrophication. And so this was very interesting to see and to compare between the different products to see which product has the most impact on biodiversity, but which which pressure is responsible for this impact. And just a side note before I end, there are no meat products that you can see on this graph because there were no meat products in the portfolio, but we can expect that these products would have had very big bubbles and mainly for land use. And so that was all for the overview of some of key results. And so I give the I'll leave Alexis finish it on what's next for Amundi. So after this pilot, what are they planning on biodiversity?
Thank you very much, Julie. So in our view, our two objectives when we started working on this pilot have been achieved. So the first one on knowledge sharing with the publication of this report and this webinar, and the second one on getting a better understanding of the biodiversity footprint metric. Indeed, the result of the work conducted for this pilot vastly inspired our biodiversity framework, and more particularly the reduced part that I will describe later on. In our view, the two main lessons from this pilot are first, that the biodiversity footprint computed only with financial data as inputs is super useful to screen a universe and a portfolio in order to get an overall view of the impact on biodiversity of the activities in which the companies operate. However, which was very well shown by Julie, this biodiversity footprint need more precise data as the one used for the pilot to correctly differentiate companies operating in the same sector or region. So this is why in the framework that I will present, we do use the biodiversity footprint, but we complement it with additional data. So I'll go briefly through the different pillars of the framework, and then if we have time, we will do a quick focus on the favor pillar. So the first pillar is the avoid one. So it's the exclusion of issuers whose practices are not compatible with global biodiversity objectives. So to identify this issuer, we'll rely on three types of data: controversies data, efficiency data. Efficiency, in our definition, is material practices and policies, and activity data. So for each type of data, we will look for data points related to each of the 5 key drivers of biodiversity loss of the IBES. So to give you an example, on the efficiency pillar, if we were to focus on the key factor overexploitation of resources, we will identify companies for which this pressure is material based on Encore database. We will identify bad practices as companies that have a higher intensity of water usage and also that are increasing their water intensity. And we will identify bad policy at companies as companies that are scored badly by CDP water. So if you're bad on this pillar, then you're excluded. For activities, for instance, we will exclude companies that have revenues in pesticides. So this is the first pillar, the avoid part. We think it's really important that in any biodiversity portfolio, we make sure to exclude the companies that have the most adverse impact on biodiversity. Then the reduce pillar come after, and this is specifically for this pillar that we used a lot the result of the pilot. So we believe that to reduce the impact of a portfolio on biodiversity, we need to pilot the reduction at two levels. The first one is intersectorial, and the second one is intra-sectorial. So at the sector level, we believe that the biodiversity footprint is very useful because it has a strong differentiating power between sectors. And we think it makes a lot of sense to target at the portfolio level a global reduction of the biodiversity footprint. However, as it was said before, this metric is not the best to differentiate companies operating in the same sector. And this is why we built a biodiversity score, which is internal and which is computed based on a lot of biodiversity-related indicators. Each indicator is linked to a heap-based pressure and then weighted based on the materiality of this pressure for the company. So in the end, this score is useful to compare companies in the same sector and is very powerful when used in conjunction with the biodiversity footprint. And it's really the two legs that enable us to reduce the impact of a portfolio on biodiversity. The third pillar that I will develop after is to try to select investment showcasing good practices on biodiversity. So we do that at the issuer level based on revenues and also at security level based on allocation to biodiversity positive projects. And the fourth pillar is the engagement with corporates and biodiversity. And we think it is a very important component of the framework. We have a specific biodiversity engagement policy that covers all the heap-based pressures, and we believe this level of action is key to launching the transition of companies. So if we can go to the next slide, which is a focus on the favor pillar. So we have two ways of identifying, of selecting securities. The first one is at issuer level, and for this we use revenues by activity data. So we have different thresholds for natural capital revenues and climate change revenues. So we see the threshold is only 20% for natural capital and 80% for climate change. Why we do that? It's because if we were to take the same threshold, climate change, because it's a more developed topic, will completely dominate the natural capital topic. And when we look at the contribution of the different pressure to the loss of biodiversity, we believe it will not make sense. So this is why we have a different threshold. Even with this threshold, when we conducted an analysis of the main market indices, we see that the companies identified in terms of market share is quite low. So it's around 1 to 2%, and even less if we apply the exclusion process after this selection. The other way we have to identify good investments is only for fixed income, and it's because we have data on when a green bond is issued, we have data on the allocation of the use of proceeds, and we identified when the use of proceeds are allocated to projects that are strongly related with biodiversity. And doing so, we see that around 11% of green bond index would qualify as favor securities. So just to finish this, I would like to have a last word on the important changes that we see coming in the area of biodiversity. First, we expect new development of methodology and also on data availability, which enables us to be even more ambitious in terms of biodiversity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alexis, for this intervention on this pilot. And so, as I said on the beginning, you will be able to find this case study in the publication at the link that we will send in the chat in a few minutes.
So I will have a few closing words for the end of this webinar. So first, I deeply apologize that we won't have time to take the question, as you can imagine, in these 3 last minutes. So for those who ask some question, we will maybe make a follow-up email with the answers of your questions, if that's okay for you. So then. So maybe a few words also on the perspectives on CDC Biodiversity side. So we have launched the Global Biodiversity Score in 2020. Since then, we have been working a lot on this tool, specifically for the application for financial institutions on our side, with 2 main applications, BIA-GBS, that was deeply described by Alexis and Julen, and also all the applications, especially for non-listed assets through GBSFI. And so we will continue to work on these different tools and use cases to improve them, to be able to better capture biodiversity impacts and dependencies of all kinds of portfolios. We are also working more and more on the integration of other tools in our biodiversity risk measurement. So as I said, one metric will not be enough. So we measure impacts, we measure dependencies, but we also more and more measure biodiversity significance of portfolios to have a comprehensive overview of all the facets of biodiversity. And so this will continue for this year and the following ones. Also, we'll continue to work on some publications because as a subsidiary of the Campredon group, we have a general interest mission. So we'll continue to make a lot of publications to keep you informed on what you can do on biodiversity, specifically on biodiversity footprinting, and specifically for us, for financial institutions. I put a few information about the other offers we have at CDC Biodiversité in the biodiversity footprinting team. So as you maybe know, we have a lot of trainings that are available, and we saw that this is a crucial need for all kinds of economic actors, and not only for financial institutions, but if you're interested, don't hesitate to get in touch. Also, we continue to work with all the members of the B4B+ Club, specifically on innovative topics such as biodiversity credits, nature positive, etc. And of course, if you want to assess your impact and dependency, prepare for the regulation, set some targets, don't hesitate to contact us. So thank you very much. Thank you a lot specifically to Julen and Alexis for their presentation. And don't hesitate to get in touch if you have any question on our publication.